Thank you very much. So yes, as you said, I'm Russell Keith-Magee, Django core dev. I'm also president of the Django Software Foundation. I'll be doing a lightning talk about that later this afternoon. In my day job, I am CTO of a startup called TradesCloud, which is a back office management software for small trades, so plumbers and electricians. And I also do bits of consulting and whatnot on the side to help pay the bills. So if you are looking for Django consultants, I'm available. Come see me afterwards. But here I'm to talk about ponies. What exactly is a pony? Well, ponies are an interesting little thing that kind of popped up. It turns out that apparently I'm actually the one responsible for the turn of phrase in the Django community. If you dig through the archives, it basically comes from Cal Henderson, who gave one of the first keynotes at the very, very first DjangoCon, said that he couldn't take Django seriously if it didn't have a mascot, and preferably a mascot with magical powers. And simultaneously, I had been answering a lot of questions on the mailing list. People saying, hey, you know, it'd be great, this is in the earlier days of Django, hey, Django would be really great if only it had this. And I would answer, yes, and a pony. So what is a pony? A pony is really just a way of saying a feature request. Django's a big community, there's lots of people, there's lots of ideas. Some of the ideas are little things, some of the ideas are big things, but it's a volunteer project. We can't satisfy everybody. And a pony request is basically just a polite way of saying to someone, you know, your idea may not happen, okay? You need to work at it, and if you're a really good boy or girl, maybe you'll get one for Christmas. So stop asking, go and volunteer, and make it happen. Don't just stay here and talk about it. Now, okay, so all those ideas come from a place that's very well-meaning. I know everyone who jumps on Django Dev, Django users, isn't there to troll us. They actually genuinely have a problem they want to solve, and they want to make that problem go away. Unfortunately, some of those ideas are really well-meaning, but really aren't going to happen. Some of them are just non-starters. Some of them keep coming back, even though we keep sending them to the naughty corner. And they're the ones that I want to focus on today. This is really sort of an opportunity for me as a representative of the core team to get out there and say, this is our decision-making process. This is why we keep saying no to this. Now, what is a bad pony? What turns an idea into a bad pony? It's not a hard and fast thing. To some extent, it's a little bit like porn. You know it when you see it. But that's not a very helpful definition. So here's a working definition. A bad pony is an idea that is just plain wrong. It's impractical. It isn't a good fit for Django's design. It takes the project in the wrong direction, or it comes without an offer of assistance. Now, the first three of those are technical distinctions. Now, an idea that is technically wrong, technically incompatible in some fundamental way. The fourth is a project management issue, and the last one is a resource management issue. But all of those things can contribute to an idea being sort of tagged as being a bad pony. So first off, ideas that are just plain wrong. This is relatively easy. These are ideas that just straight up fail at a fundamental technical level. Ideas that physically cannot be implemented. No, the idea is great if only the universe was completely different. There's a good point of reference. There's a guy called Russell who's a Linux kernel developer who wrote this thing called the 18 levels of API design. And it's effectively a reflective thing. Level 1 is an API that is impossible to get wrong, and level 18 is an API that when used is impossible to get right. And there is the levels in between of how hard it is to use this API. So I know API suggestions, proposals that are too far onto the impossible to get right are probably not going to get into Django. I won't give too many examples here. These tend not to be the problems because it's fairly obvious to point out and no, you can't do that because space-time doesn't work that way. Those things are easy to knock down. They tend not to be repeat offenders. Let me get to the impractical ideas. These are ideas that aren't obviously wrong on first inspection but aren't really a good idea. They're not wrong, but they're not really right either. So things like solving a problem that doesn't exist. For example, Django has a cache backend. It has multiple implementations of that cache backend. One of the cache backends is a database cache. Now, it doesn't use the ORM. So Django's cache backend doesn't use the ORM. Why not? There's a number of people who have come up and said, hey, it should use the ORM because you should be eating your own dog food, yada. Well, there's a reason it doesn't. Because if it's caching, caching needs to be fast by definition. And raw SQL is fast enough for the 2 SQL calls that you need to do to make caching work. So, and plus if you're really serious about caching, why the hell are you using a database to store cache? It's kind of, defeating the purpose of having a cache in the first place. Sometimes you're solving a problem that doesn't exist. There can also be things where you're changing fundamentally the design contract that Django has put out there. So for example, when you do syncdb will not touch any existing table, and it kind of does that a little bit, it just leaves it out there. If you've got a many-to-many relationship, that's really, if you add a many-to-many relationship to a model, that's really creating another table. And you could, on syncdb, create that table. Django deliberately doesn't, because the implicit design contract is syncdb touches it the first time you've got the model, and after that it's a data migration issue. So even though Django could create those to the many-to-many table, it doesn't for a reason. And sort of understanding that reason is sometimes an important part of why we say no. Ideas sometimes also get bounced because they address a smaller part of a larger problem. So, for example, the query set refactor, this is now quite historical, landed just before Django 1.0 came out. It was the real solution to a root cause. There were lots and lots and lots of bugs in Django's ORM around the way that order by would interact with select related and things like this. The fix to the problem was not to go through the 1,500 tickets and actually fix each individual little problem on the existing code. It was to take the whole problem, rebuild it, and fix the problem. So sometimes we will say no deliberately to redirect effort at the thing we actually want to rebuild properly, rather than patching over the holes of what is currently there. There's also architecture astronauting. These are people who have, taken a little bit too much of a good thing and they can see the world as just this whole, and oh, I can see it now. It's all coming together. Like, WSGI's just a request response. So everything in Django should just be a request response that's WSGI compliant, and it's WSGI all the way down, which is fine until you get to the little details. And then they say, oh no, but you can just put a little thing on the side for that. No, we're trying to keep this clean and sensible, and a little bit too much architecture astronauting can be too much. There's a guy called Tim Minchin who's from Perth, comedian, and he's got this quote that says, having an open mind is really good, but if you open your mind too much, your brain will fall out. That's the sort of, practicality counts. We care about practicality. We are pragmatists with deadlines and perfectionists with deadlines. We need to get stuff done. The third, design mismatches. These are ideas that are completely technically fine. They are completely sound ideas, but they're not right for Django. So, for example, one of the major technical differences between Django and a best-of-breed composite framework like Pyramid is that we have a single overarching design. We have the forms, all the pieces that are part of Django are built by the same team, have the same flavour, and there's commonality between the parts. And we like the parts we have, thank you very much. You are free to disagree. And you might get us to concede on small improvements. So, like, for example, we massively improved the way if statements worked back in about 1.2 through a series of feedback that this if statement restrictions you were having were just too harsh. And yeah, we'll concede some things like that if you can convince us there's a real practical application here. But you're not going to convince us that the fundamentals of how Django's template engine works is wrong. Okay, Django's template engine is not a programming language. It is not a programming language by design. We want it to be that way. Yes, Ginger allows you to do all sorts of other things, but Ginger is getting a little bit more to the programming language side of things, and we don't want our template language to be like that. You're free to use Ginger in your projects if you want to. If there is anything we can do to make your life easier using Ginger inside Django, we can do that. But we're not going to do it at the cost of making what we actually like in the framework worse. Okay? It's sort of one of these things where it comes down to, if you're having an argument with us where you're saying, I love Django, but it would only be great if it was completely different, that's not an argument that's going to win. The batteries included approach, yeah, no, I'll skip over that. Once you understand the framework, one of the reasons Django got popularity, or at least one of the reasons I like to believe Django got popularity, was that it's got a simple learning curve. The models framework looks almost exactly like the forms framework. There's no surprises when you move from one to the other. And it's only possible because we have control all of our own subcomponents. And that's sort of an implicit documentation. Once you have read the models documentation, you kind of should understand the broad concepts of how the forms works. And that's part of what we're trying to get across. We're also not particularly amenable to proposals that ignore the underlying idea or the underlying reason why certain designs exist. So, for example, proposals to say, hey, why don't you just add group by and having to the ORM? Well, Django's ORM isn't SQL. It isn't SQL by design. We have aggregate because that is an object representation of the broader concept that group by and implements. We don't want to add group by to Django's ORM. We will add an aggregation concept that gets you the functionality of group by. Things like adding variables and callables to the template language. I've been through that one already. Adding Ajax to Django's forms library. Django is a server-side framework. We don't want to dictate client-side. Sometimes when we get into things like Django's admin, we have to, and we say, we're going to use jQuery because it makes our life easier to deal with jQuery, but we want to leave the client-side things to where the client side actually is successful and let other projects worry about that. I'll come back to that in a little while. Yeah, one of the things that possibly comes up every now and then is that, well, yeah, okay, sure, but we can control this with a setting. You just add a setting and people can decide which way they want this thing to go. The thing is, a setting isn't the solution, it's the problem. Every time that you've got a configuration that can change, you've got something that can go wrong, something where you can choose the wrong value. It's a configuration that needs to be tested. It needs to be understood by end users to be done the right way. Simplicity is a virtue. Django is an opinionated framework. And part of the thing you get when you have an opinionated framework is that we don't allow you to configure out of the box everything because we're going to say this is kind of the way that it's going to work well. It may not work well for you, but feel free to adapt around it or work around the edges. Just adding settings to Django's core makes Django more complicated, and that means it's harder to use, which means its adoption is going to be harder for people to pick up. That's what we want to avoid. Now, that doesn't mean we won't add settings at all. We will add settings when necessary, but you need to be aware that essentially, if your proposal starts with, we just need to add a setting, you're going to need to defend your argument. There's also ideas that are sound and match Django, but still aren't really appropriate for Django's core. Now, I'm making a very important distinction here between the Django core and the Django community. The Django community is much larger than Django itself, and just because you've got a great idea doesn't necessarily mean it has to be in the core. Okay? And that's something I cannot reinforce enough. We want an active community of developers around Django, not just in Django. Okay, and quite often what we're looking for here is, yes, this is a great idea, build it in the community, not try to stick it into core. So one manifestation is things like feature creep, trying to turn Django into something it isn't. Django is not a web server. Apache is a web server. Use it. If you don't like it, use a different one. But don't try and convince us that Django needs to turn into a production-level web server. Django isn't a database. If you want connection pooling, use a connection pooler. There are really good ones out there. Don't try and convince us that we need to modify Django to be a connection pooler, because all we're going to do is badly implement 10% of the functionality of good connection poolers. There's also, the eternal, hey, can we just add this backend? I've got this database, Firebird, MS SQL, DB2, SQL Anywhere, whatever. Why won't we add this to Django core? Why? Because it doesn't need to be in Django core. Okay, when you say, the same goes for authentication schemes or serialization schemes or support for different file stores and all that sort of thing. Let me rephrase what we hear when people say that. When you say, let's add X to core, what we hear is, here's something else for you to worry about. Why don't you look after this for me? This is why we introduce backend APIs, to encourage the broader community to build things that work. Just because the core team is looking after it doesn't mean that it's great. It just means that we're looking after it, and we have hopefully a reputation of looking after things well. But we are not the only people who can do that, and we shouldn't be the only people who have to do that. There needs to be, as a community, quality control around other projects. And if we cover MySQL, Postgres, SQLite, and Oracle because they're basically covering the bases of all the things you can possibly do wrong with a database. So we don't want to add Firebird to that because then that's one more thing we have to worry about. You can manage that, you can maintain that completely external to core. If you have an interest in Firebird, go off and build that backend. Go off and maintain that backend. Get engaged with us at a discussion level if we need to change the backend API to do something that you need it to do in order to support your users. But that doesn't mean that we need to put your backend into our code base. The core doesn't have to do everything. In fact, the core can't do everything. We are human, we have human resources, we are volunteers at that. We can't take on responsibility for the entire universe. We need you guys, we need the community to get involved in this as well. And again, the last point, just because it's in core doesn't mean it's awesome. There is some quite bad stuff in some parts of Django's core which has been committed. Just being in core doesn't make it good. There is very, very good code that isn't in Django's core, and we want those communities, those people to be recognised as community leaders of their own, doing awesome things out there. Variation on a theme, but fundamentally the same thing here applies to apps being added to contrib. Django tagging, Django registration, Django debug toolbar. Shouldn't they just be in contrib? Well, exactly the same thing really applies here. Why does it need to be in core? What do we gain by putting Django tagging into the Django core repository? Well, essentially nothing. If anything, you get unintended side effects because development slows down because the rate at which you can update Django tagging is now all of a sudden tied to Django's release schedule, not the feature schedules of whoever's developing on tagging. Python's packaging environment, virtual env and pip and all this sort of stuff is now at the level of maturity where we can manage these dependencies really well. You can have a great big requirements file that lists all the apps that you've got and are tagged against various releases, and we should be exploiting that as much as possible. If anything, we're actually looking at deprecating things out of Django contrib and putting them back into the community. The most likely next candidate is going to be local flavor. We're looking possibly at taking that out of Django's contrib and giving it to the people who care about the local language communities and need a Peruvian bank field, registration number field. Let them look after it. They're the experts. They're the people who are with a vested interest. This is as good a time as any to clarify. What is Django contrib? What qualifies a project as a good candidate? The phrase we use is that an app in Django contrib or contrib itself is a collection of optional, de facto, standard implementations of common patterns. Okay, so what we're looking for here is the things that are completely optional. We could delete the entire contrib directory and Django would keep working. You would miss features, but you could install those features from somewhere else. They're de facto standards. Okay, these are the patterns that there's absolutely no benefit whatsoever to everybody developing their own sessions API, to everyone developing their own flash messaging API. There's benefit to having one that everyone agrees is the right one, the single one that we really must use because it's universal. And they're common patterns. They're things that everybody needs to use. Pretty much every website on the planet needs to manage sessions in some capacity. There are exceptions. There are people who don't need to use it, and that's why it's an optional app. But pretty much everyone needs to do it, and you can do it badly wrong, particularly if you're doing things like signing and you've got all sorts of key signing stuff going on. So there's benefit to the community to have one version written well, implemented well, tested well that everyone can rely on. So, for example, Django tagging, should we add Django tagging to core? Well, I've never written a site that needed tagging that would benefit from having tagging. Some people do, some people don't. It's not really universal. Also, why would we add Django tagging and not Django Taggit or any of the other dozen tagging libraries that are out there that all have very slightly different feature sets because people's needs with tagging are all very slightly different? Let's have that out in the community. Okay, let's go to Django packages and have an agreement, or have a discussion about this one's good, this one's bad, this one's good for this reason, this one's better in these situations. The community is better at sorting that out than by saying the core points and says this is the good one. All right, and lastly, the non-technical reasons. Okay, so here's a big one. Here's a big job, but I'd like someone else to do it for me, please. Here is a feature which I would like to add to Django, but I'm not going to dedicate any of my own time to make that happen. Really doesn't make us happy. And there are also things that are just generally process ponies. Django should write more blog posts. Yes, we should. Want to write them for us? Django should have a weekly news summary. Once upon a time, we used to have someone who would regularly, every week, summarise what had happened on Django Dev for everyone who didn't want to stay on top of the discussions. That takes time. You want it? Go ahead. Go and write it. We'll post it. If you can demonstrate you've got a regular cadence and you're doing it regularly, we'll put it somewhere publicly so people can see it. But again, this is also community. You don't have to be on Django's website for your resource to be valuable. People will point at you. And one of the things we're doing at the moment in the foundation is trying to rebuild Django's website to give better exposure to these community projects. Okay, at the moment, it is a little bit hidden and finding community projects can be a little bit hard. So we are trying to improve our pointing at other people. Nightly tarball downloads, have a continuous build, have precompiled PDF documentation. All these things are possible. All you need to have is the resources. And we're volunteers, and I personally don't want precompiled PDF documentation, so stop telling me that I should build it for you. There's also massive features, and this is really where the idea about Ponies originally came from. It's the people who come up, no one will disagree that schema evolution is a really, really important thing and we should have an answer for it in Django's core. All we need is someone to actually build it. And we now have Andrew Godwin, who has been maintaining South for several years. I was maintaining evolution, that kind of died and South took off. And he is actively looking at getting the core of South into Django's core because, again, this is a sort of a level where there is a core idea about migration, about the fact that we have this ORM that allows you to create tables, but you can't rename a table as a primitive. Let's wrap that up, put that in core, and then South becomes a set of libraries that exploits the core, the stuff that's in core. And we're working, like Andrew is working on that at the moment. I'm sure he would appreciate anyone who wants to help him. Other big features, things like support for non-SQL data stores or non-relational data stores. Sure, let's go straight ahead. There's not like we haven't tried. There are some big technical problems that need to be solved. If this is a big issue for you, please come and volunteer. Don't tell us that we should add it for you. So, how do you get your pony? What won't work? Putting your name on the ticket CC. That is socially acceptable, but will not progress anything. We know how many people want this feature. We know Ticket 3011 has been going around for so many years and everybody wants it. We know. Just piling on won't make anything happen faster. Saying me too on a ticket or a mailing list thread definitely will not progress anything faster. Because then we have to respond to, yes, we know you too want this. We too want this. We just need the time. Posting hyperbole about how Django is completely impractical for any website because it does not have feature X is a lie. There are many, many people out there using Django in production on very, very large websites. We have evidence to demonstrate that that is wrong. So going over the top just makes the core team frustrated because now we have to fight a rearguard action for saying Django is impractical for use on websites when we know it's not impractical for use on websites. Changing the milestone of tickets, trying to play games with the ticket tracker to try and promote your ticket. Really stop. What will work? Offer to help out. Better still, actually help out. Build up karma in the community. Do the unglamorous stuff. Triage tickets. Answer questions on Django users. Provide feedback on patches. Review other people's patches. The thing that's really important to get about this as a community is that it is a community. We need everybody to participate. And karma gets you a lot. The bigger the pony, the more important this sort of guidance becomes. This isn't just about writing code. Writing code is the smallest part of the social process of getting something into Django. Okay, code needs to be written, but it's not just a matter of a patch. You need to be an advocate for your patch, and you need to be not only the person who's yelling really loudly about your particular issue, but the person who is getting involved in other people's issues so that maybe they will give a damn about your issue. It takes me personally about 10 minutes to review a small patch. It takes me an hour maybe to review a big patch, and maybe days to review a huge patch. There are 3 things that will convince me to review your patch as opposed to one of the thousands of others that are out there. If I trust the author, if I'm vested in the idea, or if I feel like I owe you. Now, this may sound callous or rude, but open source strives on these democratic and meritocratic ideas, but it's sheer practicality. The only way I can get anything done is by ignoring 99% of the stuff that comes across my desk. So you need to, if you have something that you really are passionate about, you need to make me care about your passion. Because otherwise you're just one of yet another large number of people, saying, hey, this is a really great thing. The way you do that, get involved. Work on other people's problems, not just your own. Be a member of the community. If you look at everyone who has been added to the core team, they have a history of contributing to Django users, Django, the ticket tracker, reviewing patches, and they probably, if you go and ask them, say, yeah, the reason I got involved is because I had this thing that I wanted to get fixed, but I had to fix these other 15 problems first before anyone would pay attention to this. I know it seems kind of painful, but that you've got to go through dealing with so many other people's problems, but it's a community, and karma really does work. If Yanis Liddell or Jacob or Alex Gaynor ask me to review a patch, I will move heaven and earth to review their patch because they have done so much stuff for me that I want to help them. Make me want to help you. I want to help you, but make my life easier and I'll make your life easier and everyone's happy. If you must, ask for a pony, do the research, demonstrate you understand the problem. Implementation always trumps idle discussion. So, it's talking about how great it would be if Django had X is great. A working implementation of X is even better. And maximise utility for the core team. Make our job easier to agree with you. And it's easy to agree with you if you've done all the this back work. So, yes, Virginia, you can have a pony. Evidence. Eric has his pony. But you have to make it happen. It's not just about, hey, core team, come do this stuff for me. You need to be an active participant in the Django community, and then together we can make everything in Django really good. And also, please try to maintain a little bit of perspective. Just because you don't get your pony, it's not the end of the world. Something that affects you in 90% of cases doesn't necessarily affect everyone in 90% of cases. I can't believe Django doesn't have this, it's such a major failing, really doesn't hold, because there are a lot of people who don't have your problem, and we know that there are a lot of people who are using Django successfully. So there we go. There's the pony up at DjangoCon, sitting on his podium. If anyone's got any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
I'll repay the service of asking the first question.
Thank you, sir.
All the talks. You mentioned, just in passing, you had some more to say about the front-end side of Django, well, not that there is one, but the place of an opinionated front-end equivalent to Django that maybe marries with.
Oh no, so not that I am saying that Django. What I'm saying is that Django is deliberately not making any decisions about the front end. We are a back-end framework. We wish to remain a back-end framework. We're not going to add to contrib, a great big integration layer with Backbone, for example. There is certainly a place for that. There are all sorts of things that will have a really, really good place on the front end. They're just not Django. They may work really well with Django, but that doesn't mean they need to be in Django. So that's the distinction I'm trying to make, is that there is this server-side, client-side divide. We need to maintain that separation, or we want to maintain that separation, because other people are good experts in that space. Let's let them be experts. Let them be the community leaders for that part of the problem. And we're the community leaders for this part of the problem, or for the Django part of this part of the problem. Then the whole community gains because we've distributed the load. We're not the only people in the world who are responsible for everything that happens on the web. There are these guys over here who are experts, and those guys who are experts, and those guys who are experts. And the whole community as a result benefits because we've now got less points of failure, less bus factor to worry about.
I thought it was interesting at the Code Wars how Django admin was used as a performance tool. And one of the reasons I love Django is the fact that it's very easy in human terms to demonstrate what you're doing.
Yeah, there's a really good phrase, I think it's Hilary Mason, says the time to first kick-ass has to be low. Yeah. And that's the reason I'm involved in Django, is because the time to my first kick-ass was extraordinarily low, having never done any web stuff really before. So, yeah.
Exactly. So as a technical architect, I've worked in corporations where I haven't actually shipped a Django product, but I've used the Django admin to illustrate a concept and get people to play with it. I'm just wondering if there's any thoughts about getting more women involved in the Python community via the fact that Django's got this accessible kind of non-intimidating way of exploring your ideas via the Django admin, and is there any projects towards that?
Okay, so yes, there is. Are you aware of PyLadies? You've heard of PyLadies? Okay, so that's really the big one that is out there, started primarily by Audrey Roy in Los Angeles, if I remember rightly. And it's essentially, it's an advocacy group for getting women involved in Python, in Django, in a sort of web community, by providing an environment where it is women focused. It's a social networking. Hey, you're not alone in this. Yes, you are the minority in this room, the only one in this room. So, you aren't alone. There are other women. They are extraordinarily talented. Come along to those sort of meetings and see what other women in your local area are being involved in. Sorry?
I guess I should make the point, it's not so much about needing to get more women, but just women in a development sense adds to the team.
Absolutely, yeah.
Men. So I think there's an opportunity to improve Django by getting more women involved in the
if only
the
because
design
we can double the
process.
size of the development community and get a completely different perspective on the way certain things need to happen. Absolutely agree. And so PyLadies exists. It's not specifically a Django thing, but obviously Django's a big part involved with them because there's a lot of Django people or Django ladies who are in PyLadies. The Django Software Foundation regularly gives out grants for, if pushing involvement and advocacy of female involvement, women involvement in Django, in Python, is something that the foundation, Python Software Foundation, Django Foundation, are sort of actively involved in. So, yes, absolutely.
Alrighty, I think that's about all we have time for. You now get a PyCon mug and an African Swallow blend of coffee.
Thank you very much.
All right, so join me in thanking Russell.